All right, welcome in everyone. Thanks for being here today. I'm Ethan Soloviev. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at HowGood, and I'm glad that you could make it to our Getting Ready for FLAG webinar, focusing on how food companies can meet their carbon reduction goals. We've got a number of people still streaming in, but I think I'm going to get us started. So, again, for those just joining, welcome. I'm Ethan Soloviev. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at HowGood. I will be joined today by Jemima Snow, our Product Marketing Manager, to deliver this webinar and show you some really exciting stuff coming out in our platform. So thanks all for joining today. Here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to look at carbon accounting and how we set the stage, why it's important, who are the key players in the carbon accounting space and reporting space, and how FLAG fits into all of it. We're going to look at FLAG guidance. What does it mean for your company? Why has it come about? How did it come about? Who exactly is it relevant for? And what are some of the opportunities for target setting and reporting, and what are the timelines? Then we'll take a look at HowGood's new FLAG dashboard, some of the new metrics and features we're rolling out available in our software platform, Lattice, HowGood's core kind of value propositions that we offer here, and talk a little bit about what's coming up in the product roadmap. Then we're going to do a Q&A with HowGood's FLAG team and wrap it up. So thanks again for being here. I'm going to hand it over to Jemima Snow to lead you in the first section. Here we go.
All right, thanks, Ethan. And welcome, everyone. So to get us started, I'm going to talk briefly about the big picture context behind carbon accounting. So we all know that we're here to learn about FLAG, but I just wanted to restate the context behind carbon accounting so that we're all thinking on the same page. The driving force behind carbon accounting in general, and the initiatives by the GHG Protocol and SBTi specifically, is to empower corporates to lead the decarbonization of the global economy and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by 2050. Now, why 1.5 degrees? Well, modelling has been done by climate and policy specialists to model the impacts of different degrees of warming on the planet, on humans, agriculture, and biodiversity. 1.5 degrees is seen as the best case scenario. You may have seen some of the more dire consequences that warming of up to 2, 4, or even 6 degrees would have on the planet. The land sector, also referred to as FLAG, forest, land, and agriculture, accounts for 22% of global emissions, and it's been identified as having the potential to deliver 30% of emissions reductions by 2050. Now, when it comes to carbon accounting and reporting, there's a collection of different bodies and standards that work in concert with each other throughout a company's carbon accounting journey. Now, even though at this stage carbon accounting is still voluntary for all companies, there are various pieces of legislation around the world that are looking to make it mandatory in the near future. The first step in this process is measuring and accounting for your GHG emissions, also known as your GHG inventory. The GHG Protocol is the global accounting body in this space, meaning that they set the standards for how GHG emissions should be measured and accounted for. HowGood's carbon accounting has been built according to 2 of the GHG Protocol standards. The first is the product standard, which is the standard that accounts for the GHG emissions of a product throughout its life cycle. The second is the corporate Scope 3 standard, which defines how Scope 3 emissions, meaning those emissions that are generated throughout the supply chain outside of your company's direct control, should be accounted for and reported. Now, HowGood's Scope 3 report is the only Scope 3 report offering to date that's been built off of these 2 foundational GHG Protocol standards, and it's backed by our 17 years of agricultural research and expertise. That said, these 2 standards that I've just mentioned are not specific to the land sector, meaning they're not food or agriculture specific, which is where the land sector and removals guidance comes in. So we'll be talking about that today in the context of FLAG. We'll get to that next. Now, the next step in this accounting and reporting process is where the Science Based Targets Initiative comes in, or SBTi. SBTi is a global target setting body which provides the framework for you to set sustainability goals that are aligned with climate science. Up until now, SBTi has enabled you to set these science-based targets, but again, there hasn't been any specific guidelines around land-based targets until FLAG came along. So in terms of who this is relevant for, it's mainly large enterprises that are going to be setting SBTi targets. Small and medium enterprises that set SBTi targets are not required to set FLAG targets yet, although there is an accelerated pathway for them if they want to. So once a company has measured and accounted for their GHG emissions using the GHG protocol's guidance, and they've set their targets for their emissions reductions via SBTi, the next step in this process is for them to report those emissions either to the CDP or GRI. But that's not the end of the journey. The urgent and ongoing nature of global emissions reductions means that once you've established your baseline and you've reported your emissions, you need to work to reduce those emissions over time and report your progress each year, both to global bodies like the CDP or GRI, but you can also report them in your own company reports, as we've seen with some of HowGood's customers. So for the purposes of this webinar today, we'll just be focusing on these first two stages of the journey, which we'll jump into now. So I'm sure that you've all heard the acronyms LSR and FLAG thrown around, and it's something that we get a lot of questions from our customers about. So I just want to make sure that we're on the same page as to the differences between LSR and FLAG. As I mentioned before, the Land Sector and Removals Guidance, LSR, is an accounting standard that's currently being developed by the GHG Protocol to instruct you specifically on how to account for and report land sector emissions in your GHG inventory. This standard is needed to account for those 22% of global emissions that the land sector is responsible for, and to achieve the potential climate mitigation that the land sector offers. A land-specific accounting standard is also needed in order to track progress towards achieving the SBTi's FLAG targets. And it comes back to the concept that you can't manage what you can't measure. So we couldn't have SBTi releasing a land sector target setting program without a guide on how to measure those land sector emissions. The Land Sector and Removals Guidance is still in progress. It's in draft consultation with industry stakeholders. It's been delayed a couple of times at this point, and it's expected that the guidance will be finalized in mid-2024. HowGood has been involved in that consultation process, and in our conversations with the GHG protocol, what we're hearing is that the final guidance isn't going to get any stricter than where the draft currently stands. While we've built our FLAG dashboard to align with the current version of the guidance, the only real lack of clarity that's still up for discussion is around carbon removals and the degree of primary data required to measure it. Now, SBTi's FLAG guidance, on the other hand, has already been released in September 2022. The guidance enables you to make commitments and set targets for the reduction of land sector emissions, and it's aligned to the LSR's 3 categories of emissions and removals. And the SBTi recommends that you start now. You can do this by calculating your baseline emissions in line with the current guidance. You can set your target and you can begin to put a plan together for how you'll achieve it, which Ethan is going to show you shortly. So we talked a little bit about the big picture drivers behind climate change earlier, but I want to talk more specifically about why FLAG and LSR have come about now and why it's a game changer for carbon accounting. As we've mentioned previously, land sector emissions contribute an estimated 22% of global emissions. Now, that may sound like a heavy responsibility to bear on the part of land sector intensive companies like food companies, but it also makes it a huge opportunity. So if we look at the other major industries that contribute to global emissions, they're somewhat easier to track because the data exists within these human-created and controlled systems. So for example, transport contributes 15% of emissions. Buildings contribute 6%, energy systems 33%, and industry in general contributes 24%. Nature, on the other hand, is far more complex and interconnected and harder to measure than some of the systems that lie within these industries. However, nature also harnesses the power of plants and soil and biomass in removing and storing carbon, which technological solutions haven't been able to match yet. So for example, if you've seen some of the technological solutions that are at various stages of commercialization, like concrete made out of coral or devices that suck CO2 out of the atmosphere or, chemicals that block out the sun, nature does these things far more efficiently. But to truly harness the power of these nature-based solutions, You need to work with a provider who has deep expertise in mapping nature-based systems. You need access to granular emissions factors rather than global averages. You need a consistent means of assessing your FLAG emissions, using the same system boundaries and functional units and methodology across your whole portfolio. You need the ability to track raw materials throughout all stages of the supply chain, from crop to processed ingredients, products, categories, brands, and portfolios. And you need to be able to do all of this quickly and easily using dynamic, agile tools, because climate change isn't going to wait for anyone. So at this stage, it's important to note that setting FLAG targets is not a requirement for all food companies. It's only if you've committed to an overall SBTi target that you're required to set a separate FLAG target, if you fall under one of these two categories. So firstly, if you fall under one of the SBTi sectors listed here: food production, food and beverage processing, retailing, forest and paper products, or tobacco. Separately, if your company is from another SBTi sector that's not listed, but your FLAG emissions contribute 20% or more of your overall scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, then you're required to set a FLAG target. So this could mean, for example, furniture manufacturing, if the majority of your products are made from wood. So while SBTi targets are typically best suited to larger enterprise companies, SBTi has developed an expedited option for small and medium businesses who employ less than 500 people to cater to an increasing number of SMEs who do want to demonstrate their commitment to reducing emissions and responding to climate change. So what are the requirements of a FLAG target? Well, FLAG is the land sector-specific initiative of SBTi. It's one of several other sector-specific initiatives that aim to do so. The key requirements of a FLAG target are, firstly, to set near-term FLAG science-based targets. So this means a 5 to 10-year emissions reduction target in line with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. The second is to account for removals in those near-term FLAG targets. So GHG removals include things like improving forest management practices and enhancing soil carbon sequestration on working lands. Thirdly, you need to set long-term FLAG science-based targets. So if you're in one of those FLAG sectors, you need to commit to reducing at least 72% of your emissions by no later than 2050. You also need to set a zero deforestation target for no later than 2025. Now, this means that you can't have any deforestation in your supply chain by 2025, and there's only a year and a half left to implement it. You can see your deforestation risk instantly by working with HowGood. So instead of wasting time trying to, gather the data yourself, you can get to work on reducing and eventually eliminating deforestation from your supply chain by the time 2025 comes around. Lastly, you're required to set science-based targets for fossil emissions. So this just means that you still need to set an overall science-based target, which includes targets for reducing fossil emissions. You can't set a FLAG target without setting an overall SBTi target. So all of this is why at HowGood, given that we have deep expertise in agricultural production, we're excited to see these kind of near and long-term land-based targets. Our platform Lattice has always existed to help food companies achieve their sustainability goals. And now that there's a systemized way of tracking and achieving land-based goals, we're excited to build it into the platform. Now, in terms of setting your FLAG target, SBTi has built an online tool to guide you through the process of setting your FLAG target. The tool makes setting a FLAG target a very standardized process. So you enter your baseline year, which can be no earlier than 2015. You enter your target year, which can be no later than 2027. And you enter your baseline emissions for the base year, which HowGood can help you calculate. Our extensive database of granular emissions factors for more than 33,000 ingredients in the food system means that you can set a highly accurate baseline, which is going to be much more achievable when it comes to actually reducing your emissions over time. The tool then tells you, based on your commodities and sourcing regions, how much you need to reduce your emissions in order to align with a scenario of 1.5 or 2 degrees of warming by 2050. Having this standardized process is what ensures that FLAG targets are aligned with climate science. So it's not up to any company to design their own emissions reductions goals, which would be very subjective. It's up to you to implement it by reducing your emissions in line with climate science. So in terms of timelines, FLAG targets must be set depending on when you have set or plan to set your overall SBTi targets. So if you set your SBTi targets prior to April 30 of this year, you must set your FLAG targets within 6 months after the LSR guidance is finalised. If you set your targets after April 30, then you have to set both targets on submission. So regardless of where you are in your FLAG journey, whether you've set the targets already or you're planning to, this is definitely something that you should be preparing for.
Thank you, Jemima, for that excellent and clear overview of FLAG and science-based targets. I'm going to step in here and hit that little star that's on the bottom there and then take us forward. So that little star says, yeah, the guidance has been delayed. It's been delayed again. We now expect it mid-2024. Some companies might say, oh, well, I've got plenty of time. It's not even out yet. I don't even have to do it yet. But from our perspective, it's really not about the guidance necessarily that we're responsible to. It's actually to the Earth and all the people on the Earth as the impacts of climate change accelerate. So yes, the guidance is getting pushed out, but if you're submitting now, anytime past April 30th, or even if you have and you're waiting to do your FLAG, now's really the time to get in there and make it work. I also wanted to just thank Jemima for a particular bit in that last section on nature-based systems and how complex they are. Along with being the Chief Innovation Officer at HowGood, I'm also a small-scale farmer in upstate New York, 30 acres of apples and grass-fed sheep and lamb, shiitake mushrooms, and managing and working with natural systems is indeed complex, but it doesn't have to be confusing and it doesn't have to slow you down from your work on FLAG and carbon reduction. So with that, I'm going to take us forward. I'm going to put on a slightly different hat here and become a VP of Sustainability at FoodCo and tell you a little story of kind of what my journey has been at FoodCo, setting science-based targets, hearing about FLAG, and sort of what am I going to do next. So FoodCo, my company, set a science-based target back in 2022. In our ESG report, we said we were going to reduce absolute scope 1 and 2 GHG emissions 20% by 2030, and we also said we'd reduce the absolute scope 3 GHG emissions by 30% by 2030. We did a bit of an assessment. I hired some quite expensive consultants that didn't have enough good software and data. It took them a long time, but they did come up with an overview of my scope 1 and 2 and 3. And wow, as a food company, scope 3 was really where the massive amount of my impact was. And then it turns out, as I see other industry reports, for retail, it's usually over 90%. For most food companies, it's in the 70 to 90+%. And so the stuff that's easy to track and manage, I kind of understand scope 1 and 2. It's my electricity. It's, it's what I own. What's always been a little scary for me and hard to figure out is how do I look all the way upstream into my supply system to understand the impacts in scope 3 and be able to track them and do something about them. So then the draft FLAG guidance was released and the LSR, and that was useful. I was getting some greater clarity, but also now even maybe more concerns about data. When I go back and sort of look at my baseline, but with FLAG emissions data, will I have higher emissions than I had previously accounted for or that my consultants were able to figure out? Am I going to be able to find data that is actually FLAG compliant, that's up to date, and that is granular to the level of detail that science-based targets is asking for? Also, because I'm a farmer and we're really excited about regenerative agriculture, we've been running regenerative agriculture pilots in our supply system. We think we're capturing a bunch of carbon, putting it into the soil. Am I going to be able to get credit for that? Can I use that? Can I talk about that in marketing? Could I put that in my target? How do I actually track all of that information on removals so that we can kind of valorize what we've been doing? And then also, I've got a bit of primary data. There's some of my ingredients that I know a lot about, but there's hundreds, if not thousands of ingredients that I use in my food products. Do I need primary data from everyone upstream, from all of my suppliers? Will I be able to go forward and set a FLAG even if I don't have that? At the same time, I know that as VP of Sustainability, I'm not alone. Decarbonization is a team sport. So I want to be able to meet the needs of other people in my organization and also really empower cross-functional action. If it's just me in a silo, I'm not going to be able to move a company the size of FoodCo. So there's other people asking me things. We have a formulator over in R&D who's saying, I'm making recipe decisions on a daily basis. How do I know if they're going to support our corporate reduction goals? I've got somebody from marketing and sales, coming in and saying, okay, I know we've been making investments in regenerative agriculture, in sustainability. Is there a way I can leverage them to make more sales? Do we have any data that I can use to back up our claims on a product by product level? Which of our products, this is their VP of innovation now, who's looking at all the different product lines and saying, which products have the most impact? Where should I renovate? Where should I be innovating? If there's some carbon reduction potential, what should I do to sort of figure that out and then be able to assign it to individual formulators to work on and improve our products? And then over from procurement, procurement teams in some ways are getting the brunt of the push from FLAG and from carbon reduction in general. We just got back from Climate Week, where we heard a number of talks from HowGood and others focused on FLAG, regenerative agriculture, artificial intelligence. And so procurement teams are kind of starting to feel the brunt of this. They're used to engaging with their suppliers on price, on terms, et cetera. But also they're wondering, okay, do I now need to gather carbon data? How am I going to do this? How am I going to engage with suppliers to get the granular impact that I need at scale? And all of this really points to something that most science-based target setting, a lot of the accounting that's been done has been done from a sort of a top-down, look at the whole enterprise, look at scope 1 and 2. And then when it gets to scope 3, we use some category averages to use the spend method with the best data available. HowGood really has a perspective that we should come the other direction from the products up to get really granular information at the product level, because it empowers so many people through the organization, from the formulator to marketing and sales to procurement teams, to understand exactly where they can have an impact. So overall, as VP Sustainability at FoodCo, I need a reliable data solution that can save me time and allow for more of that sort of dynamic innovation, more of that scenario planning looking forward as I'm trying to figure out how to hit my targets. When I started at FoodCo, we had a sense of that, that top-down, that overall scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. This was, again, from our baseline in 2020, and it was using the spend-based method. We had global average emissions factors for all of our data, but now I'm saying I need to go into more granularity. I need to take that, total emissions and be able to break it down. What portion of that total emissions is not from the FLAG sector of things? What portion is from land use change itself, which is going to be different from the land management emissions? And then further, if I do have removals happening in my supply system, how do I account for those? So this second 3 here, the land use change emissions, the land management emissions, and the carbon removals, these are the 3 categories that LSR and FLAG are pointing to, that we need to be able to break out for all of our ingredients, for all of our materials, for all of our products, for our whole portfolio. What portion of the impact comes from each of these? In the land use change, here we see emissions that are coming from deforestation, forest degradation. Those are really the biggest ones. But then there's others: coastal wetlands conversion, peatlands, draining, burning, savannas, and natural grasslands, basically significant land use change. The land management emissions, this is coming from enteric emissions, manure management, agricultural waste burning, fertilizer, crop residue, machinery. All of this is from the land management itself. And then sometimes there's carbon removals, where we have forest restoration, where we have silvopasture, or regenerative agriculture, regenerative agroforestry, other ways that we're enhancing soil organic carbon. So we need to be able to sort of see and track all of those. As a sustainability director, as a VP, that's quite a lot. And I'm kind of thinking, how do I keep track of all of this on my own? And here's where we enter with HowGood's new FLAG dashboard, which gives me a huge amount more insight and detailed granularity into those 3: land use change, land management emissions, and carbon removals, but also gives me the ability to go down to detailed product level to understand the impacts that I can have and where I can make improvements. So I'm going to switch over now and actually go into the sort of early alpha prototype of HowGood's flag dashboard, so you all can get a sneak peek of what's coming, and we'll run through this and then wrap up and do some questions. So you should now, I'm going to share a new screen, and you should now be able to see a mostly empty screen that's just kind of get us introduced to the dashboard. So in the past, all I had was a sense of my total supply chain emissions across scopes. There was a big number, it's metric tons CO2 equivalents per year, almost 20,000. And maybe I had some sense of like, I had some carbon footprints and knew a bit what that was, but I didn't quite understand how to link them together. Now, with the new flag dashboard and information that HowGood's platform Lattice is bringing in, we can start to see the breakdown of what are the land use change emissions, what are land management emissions, what are carbon removals. If you add up these two red ones and the green one, that'll get you to a net flag emissions and removal. And so that's something we're going to track and really focus on through the rest of this look at the platform itself. Is, what is that net flag emissions and removals, and how can we work with that and modify it? Now we'll see that in this tile here, where that's exactly what we're looking at. So now it's down a bit. It's 12,491 metric tons CO2 equivalents per year. But then also I can go further and see the specific breakdown. So here's the land use change emissions. I can see a specific number for that. The land management emissions, this is across the course here, and then the carbon removals, what's actually coming out. And those same numbers are reflected down here on this side of the platform. So seeing this is great, and it gives me the opportunity to think about and say, okay, well, maybe it would be useful to set an actual target and create an initiative. So here we have the opportunity. I'm ready to set my SBTi FLAG goals. So I'm going to go and create a new science-based target initiative. I'll click that, and it gives me a couple options. I'm going to build out a new initiative that's going to be, here's my overall science-based target, which is minus 30% by 2030. But I'm going to build a new scenario now that's more focused on flag. So this one, I'm going to aim a little higher. I'm going to see if I can get a 42% reduction in flag by 2030. Yes, this scenario has a specific goal, so I'll kind of check that off and set a little more information about that goal. I can include different workspaces. Workspaces you could think of that as the different brands that I have in Foodco as a company. You could also think of it as different categories that you're selling in. So I'm going to include a bunch of different workspaces here. This is just pulled up all of my products. So there's 1,076 products in all of my portfolio across a number of different workspaces. I could select some on or off if I only want to focus on a particular area. But for now, at this high level, I'm just going to do all of them. Then I'll go in and choose a particular metric, which is going to be the net flag emissions and removals. And it pulls in from the data we already have loaded into the system. Here's what our current total is, metric tons CO2 equivalent per year. And then I'm going to add a target amount. So if I'm going to go for 42% reduction, I should aim for 7,224 metric tons CO2e per year by 2030. Great. Okay, so now I've got that. I'll create the scenario, and this is then going to bring up a new view of what I'm looking at from now all the way to 2030. So I've set a goal here. We can see that's the reduction. We've got the baseline number running straight across here at that 12,491 metric tons CO2e per year. But then we can also see that expected emissions are sort of rising up here, and that's because I'm projecting a healthy business growth across the time period. So my absolute emissions, even though I've set a baseline, are likely to increase. And now I've got to figure out, how do I get this line down to the goal that I've just set? There's also a way to set incremental targets, which we'll look at a little bit later. But for now, I'm going to scroll down and say, okay, let's figure out which workspace I should really focus on in order to try to move that expected emissions down towards the goal. So here, I'm going to sort this to see what is my highest. I've sorted my workspaces here. It looks like the food service is the highest. So that's at, almost 4,000. That's almost a third overall of my total emissions across this time. So that looks good. Let's dig in there. We have a goal set specifically for that, which I could tweak if I want it up or down. And it shows me the spread, how far I am from actually achieving it, along with the breakdown by the three core categories we need to track. So let's go into food service. Here in food service, we can see again, the breakdown between non-flag, land use change, land management, and carbon removals. And we see again what our current is and the target that we're trying to hit and how far we are. Now, in order to make changes in food service, what I really want to look at is what are the particular products. Now, I'll just name that today we're focusing on a path that looks at specific products I sell. There's a chicken fajita, there's a deviled egg sandwich, there's some sugar cookies. You can also approach this from a procurement lens to say which of the materials that I purchase are having the largest net flag emissions and removals footprints. But because nobody has been able to offer product level granularity before, we're going to focus there today. So here I can see that this chicken fajita is the highest, across all of my different products that I'm selling. It has 339 metric tons CO2e across the period. And you can see how that breaks down into land use change, emissions, and removals. So let's dig into the fajita itself. Now I'm in that specific product, and I want to say, how do I move this down to achieve my goal at this individual product level? So we can look and see down to real specific detail about this product. Here's the actual ingredients in it. It's got chicken. There's my favorite chunky salsa sauce. There's dehydrated bell peppers. We can see basic information about where I'm sourcing from the US. It's USDA organic. It's being processed in the US. I can see the percent weight and inclusion it is. And then I can see broken down on an ingredient by ingredient level, the same breakout from land use change, land management emissions, and carbon removals. Nobody's been able to show this so clearly before in the past. If you're lucky, if you could see farm to farm gate emissions broken out from the rest of the carbon life cycle. And here we've broken it down even further so you can see what the impact of land use change is compared to these other three categories. So if I want to understand more about, why is cooked chicken, what I can click on any of these individual cells, and that will bring up some significant more information about that ingredient. So here we've got cooked chicken. You can see that it's 4.08 kilograms CO2 equivalent per kilogram. That's an emissions factor. That's a carbon intensity number for that particular ingredient. As a product developer, I can learn more about, okay, what could I do? Animal-based ingredients. Maybe I can switch the ingredients. Here's some ideas for ingredient substitution. I can see maybe where I'm sourcing from currently, and if there's some other locations I could consider sourcing from for that same ingredient. And then I can even go in and look at a particular data source, exactly where this is coming from. So right now, this is a link that will take you to a scientific journal article that says exactly where HowGood pulled that 4.08 number. We can also have a number of different data sources, for example, from EcoInvent, who's a partner of ours, or any of the other major database providers that provide emissions factors. We can also take your company-specific emissions factors and load them up into the platform, so that you can see anything you've calculated, anything from your supply system, anything from your specific ingredient suppliers, and also then benchmark that against industry standard information and EcoInvent and other sources. So it's all in one place. And this is actually drawing from the world's largest product and ingredient sustainability database in terms of impact factors. Okay, so I've learned a bit about the chicken. I see it's high land use change, high land management. I want to make a change here, so I'm going to go up and say let's edit the formula. Now it's showing me, okay, I haven't made any changes yet. Let's go in and make a change to the chicken. So I could try a different standard. I could source it from a different place, but instead I'm going to actually switch out the ingredient itself. I've heard that plant-based foods have a lot lower impact. So let's look for maybe there's a plant-based chicken I could try swapping out. So I've typed in plant-based. This is pulled up. Okay, here's a plant-based chicken from Unlikely Foods that's vendor verified. So they've given some specific information with a much lower carbon intensity, GHG emissions factor there. That's great. So I'm going to select that and replace my cooked chicken with this plant-based chicken. And immediately you see a little change. These colors got better. Land use change has improved. Land management has removed. Hasn't necessarily captured more. There's not necessarily more carbon removals happening, but at least I've decreased on this. And then if I go up to the product level, we can see now across the whole time span, that one change has reduced our carbon footprint, the net flag emissions and removals by 180 metric tons CO2 equivalent across the entire time. And then you can see how each of the land use change, land management emissions have also gone down significantly. We've actually we're past our 197 goal, which is great. Didn't really change carbon removals much. It wasn't necessarily something that would affect that. But overall, I've made a great change to this product. And you can see that the scale here has decreased, overall improving this product. Now let's see what happens with this all saved if we go back up to food service and kind of see that next level. So if I go, changes are saved, and go on to food service as a whole. Here we can see that, again, we've dropped that 180 metric tons. Now this number is lower. We moved a little bit down on each of them. That was by making a change to one product. Now, if I want to do that at scale, I can't go into every single product and make changes. So what I'm going to do is actually use the bulk edit feature, where I can go in and say, across a number of different products that I sell, let's apply some different standards, like organic, or like a land to market for the meat, or maybe we're changing sourcing locations in batch to get them all focused, more locally to decrease our transportation emissions. Or we could change suppliers. Maybe there's a specific supplier you have with a lower footprint, or like we just did, you could change ingredients. So by changing ingredients and doing that in bulk edit across all of your products, you can quickly simulate what would happen, not just by changing a particular product, but actually affecting your entire portfolio. So once you've done that, we can finish. That will make changes across there. We can head back to, again, our overview workspaces that's across all of the different brands or categories we have. And you can see that all the changes I made, the bulk edit, the individual product, has reduced our expected emissions. We're not all the way down to our goal yet, but we've moved from high up above the baseline projected to our expected emissions based on granular information on individual products are now much lower and getting closer to our goal just from a bit of work. I can also set slightly more incremental targets. So this is just projecting across the whole time frame, but I could go in and say, well, here's what I want to do by, right here we have 2023 and 2030. That was a scenario I made, but the same process you just saw, I can click new scenario and add a couple new scenarios. And now I've got a 2026 point, a 2028 point, and this is really showing a more specific detailed path running towards our emissions. Now that I've done that and kind of got clear on that, I actually want to be able to manage initiatives. I need to be able to assign to different people in the company, that R&D formulator, that procurement team, that marketing and sales team. I want to be able to put different initiatives out from this high-level dashboard overview that we're showing. And so we need a way to manage initiatives. So HowGood's new initiatives dashboard takes in, there was our science-based targets, -30 by 2030, our -42% flag reduction we were aiming for. I've assigned specific people to it. I can see at a high level, what's the goal? How far away are we from achieving that right now? What does that look like? But I can also do things on a regenerative sourcing project, or on a fleet decarbonization, or on a renewable energy on site for my suppliers. I can build up different initiatives in here and model all of them. Now, your SVP or your chief procurement officer, chief sustainability officer, they might not come and be in this platform day to day, though they could come here and just look at this dashboard, or you can have this sent to them automated direct to their email, this kind of high level report on a monthly basis, so that they can see how are we doing on all our initiatives to hit our decarbonization and sustainability goals. Okay, so that was a sneak peek at HowGood's flag dashboard and platform. There's actually one last thing that I want to note in the platform before we go, which is, let me just go back over there for a second, that there's this export button here. So all of the data that we've looked at, everything that we've been working with, you don't just have to work it in the platform. I can click this export button, and that will actually download a CSV or Excel file, which will put it right in the hands of whoever needs to use it to manipulate it in a different way, so that we can see it pulls out, it automates the reporting for a scope 3 report that includes flag emissions and their specific breakdowns in it, so you can manipulate it outside of the platform as well. It's already formatted to help reporting for CDP, GRI, TCFD, and there's also a way to download the full methodology documents and all the sources, the actual data sources used to calculate flag. So also with the data from that spreadsheet, I can do things like understand, the breakdown between my different sectors. I can look at my high intensity commodities to find out, okay, it's vanilla, cacao, buckwheat. I didn't even know buckwheat could have a high land use change. Turns out there's a lot of land use change happening in Canada right now that's tied to oats and buckwheat and other crops. So you can uncover some really interesting things in those high intensity commodities for each segment. We can also break it out if we want to do it by locations and say, okay, not not only where are we having the biggest impact, but also where's their potential? Where could we do some more carbon removals across our supply chain? And using this sort of information, I can build up a longer term strategy that's focused on here's our current net flag emissions, we have projected business growth, we have our flag target, but then I can also build sort of a waterfall chart that says what abatement strategies, what's the glide path to it. So if I want to eliminate deforestation, if I want to do some reformulation, that'll take us down. Maybe we could work with our suppliers on certain partnerships. We could change some sourcing to low land use scenarios. And then ideally, we're doing some regenerative agriculture and forestry, and that can take us together past our flag target. So all data like this on different abatement strategies can be pulled out of the tool and then used, manipulated, put in a deck like this that I can go and pitch at FoodCo to my CEO so that we can say, let's reduce, scope 3 emissions by 42%. I believe it's possible. Here's the glide path to do it, and set that flag target. Okay, now I'm stepping out of my hat here of VP Sustainability at FoodCo. Once you do the setting, there's a whole other thing. We'll do future webinars on this, that you actually need to find pathways to reduction. So you need to be able to strategize about what the targets are, model different scenarios. You have to figure out where to take action. How do you assign goals internally? How do you prioritize what you're going to work on? And then also track progress, both for internal and external stakeholders. And HowGood can help you do all of that. We'll do more in future webinars, but I think given the timing, I want to thank you all for watching through that story, and we're going to open it up for questions with HowGood's flag team. So let's do that, and I think maybe there are already some questions coming in, but let's take some questions from the audience.
So I can take this first one that came in. Does this data set separate land management emissions from CO2 versus other gases such as methane or N2O? At this time, we don't separate those gases in the data set.
Well, then I'll say for our side, though it's not in platform yet, we are doing some research on this. I can't talk about specific clients, but we have recently been working on some of the top 6 commodities and doing breakdowns by individual GHG, so CO2, NO, and methane as well. So for some commodities, we have that in the back end. We'd love to work with more people on your particular crops to see what that breakdown is, and then also what the drivers are behind them. So while Liz is absolutely correct, not in platform today, if you want to do that, just holler and we'll see what we can do. Let's do the next question there.
Ethan, I can jump in. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Nina. I'm head of product. There was a question about what type of data must be uploaded by the client company, which is a great question. So for the example that Ethan just showed in platform, really the 2 pieces of information that are important are the ingredients text. So what is in that chicken fajita recipe, and ideally some type of sales data. So that could be your actual data from your provider, or it could be estimated. But the great thing about Lattice is that we can actually work with whatever level of data granularity you have. So particularly if you're a retailer, we can work to model estimates based on sales category or product type. But if you're a CPG and you have that level of granularity, we can actually plug straight into your ERPs or your PIMs and pull data in from your existing platforms or dashboards. And then all of the data that you're looking at in Lattice is coming from those systems.
Awesome. Thank you, Nina. And I forgot to put up a slide, which is this one, which you should all see now, which is basically who's going to be here responding to your questions. So thank you, Nina, for that. And Liz, who's our data scientist and flag lead. So now you can see who we all are. And let's go on to the next question there.
I think I can grab this next one as well. So there's a follow-up question on how we calculate the different contributions of the ingredients for a product, like that chicken fajita example we were looking at. The question was, do you have any recommendations on approaches to take when the recipe of a composite product is unknown? And that is definitely something that we've worked with a lot with companies, from retailers to food service, to distributors or individual CPGs that are working with co-mans and different co-packs to source the ingredients. So ideally, we can use granular information when you have it, but if we don't have that data, we can definitely model based on the type of ingredient. So looking at something like mozzarella cheese, we can make some basic assumptions about what that looks like, pulling from our huge database of data on the over 1 million products that we've analyzed before. So we can do that for specific ingredients, assuming where you may be sourcing from when you don't know your sourcing locations, or for types of products like a cheese blend or a chocolate chip or something like that, that we can actually model some more granular ingredient data.
Awesome. Thanks, Dina. I'll take this one that says, is this tool uniquely for FLAG targets, or do you also support calculations, tracking, and these features for scope 1 and 2 and other parts of scope 3? So basically, yes, we do 1, 2, and 3. We focus, HowGood's always trying to do the hardest thing that no one else can do. So we have focused a huge amount of attention on getting this part right, understanding removals, land use change. How do you break that out? How do you put all of that in platform? But we can also do scopes 1, 2, and the other parts of scope 3, all the 15 plus different categories and subcategories that are there. You'll see more on that from us in Q4 of this year. But the short answer is yes, we can do it. If you're using other tools, great, happy to partner with them. Also, HowGood has major partnerships with some of the other providers of scope 1, 2, and 3. And so glad to talk about that or look at specific integrations through our API or other methods. If you already have a provider who's doing scope 1 and 2 or some part of 3, we can feed back and forth with our data and make it really easy. Maybe I'll pass it to Liz. I think you had another one there.
Yeah, we actually have a few that are related to removals. And so I'm kind of going to answer a couple of these in a row just because they're all very intertwined. So our first one was, does SBTi provide guidance on which methodologies or protocols to follow for carbon reduction projects? SBTi says that you should follow the GHG protocol land sector removals guidance, and they do have a lot of requirements around removals. They're pretty strict. You need primary data, you need ongoing monitoring, as well as the kinds of data that you can accept. All of this is laid out in LSR, so I won't go into too much detail, but this leads me into my next question and answer, which is, are there default factors for removals, or do removals have to be input from primary data per LSR? We follow the GHG protocol with our measurements and platform. And so primary data is required for removals. And we can work with you to see what kinds of removal data that you have and whether or not it fits into the categories that are accepted by the GHG protocol.
Right. Just to give Liz a break, I'll take one that came in more recently. We're going to try to get to all these. We're tracking them back here. So there's one that's, do you support third-party assurance for clients? Yes, we do. This is I'm almost going to like pull up our live platform and show you some of the reporting features that are in that, but that would be off script. So let us know. I'll give you some call to action at the end that you can use to get in touch and see some of this. But essentially, yes, for any product, you can work with us and one of our partner third-party validators. And there's a wide range of those, from Carbon Trust to Control Union to Sustain Cert, and they're really deep on the ground regenerative agriculture work. So any of those, partner with us and have a way directly through the platform that you can request assurance for a particular emissions factor, particular detail on removals. And then they will go through and do the validation and get you that assurance. It's also possible at a portfolio-wide level. So in our platform, you can sort of lock a set of products, whether that's finished goods products, or you can lock a supply portfolio and say, provide me assurance to this level of detail on all of these materials. And that will all run, and you can track the progress through the platform right where you got the data to begin with. So the short answer is yes, we do provide third-party assurance for clients, and that is through our strong partnership ecosystem. Nina or Liz, you want to pick one up?
Yeah, I can jump in. So there was a great question. It says identifying new emission reduction scenarios is a huge win, but what hurdles or costs do customers face in actually implementing the new scenarios? Which I love this question. And I think ultimately we've been talking about the mechanics of this, like how do you measure, how do you track, how do you get everyone across your organization in alignment moving towards that goal? But really, we don't propose to have any of the answers to those tough questions. We're not a food company that's actually having to go and work with the suppliers ourselves, but we're here to enable and really support our customers with the tools. Luckily, we have an amazing group of companies that we get to work with every day, and our CS team and our product marketing teams have put together a number of amazing resources that are ongoing all the time. So there are customer connects and webinars and internal working sessions where our customers actually get together in a room and talk through what those real world challenges are when you actually go to put one of these plans in place, because they vary depending on the type of product you make, where you make it, where you're selling it. And those conversations are the ones that we're hoping to enable.
Liz, you got another one you want to jump on?
Yeah, we had a very specific question here about land use impact of indoor and or vertical farming. Our team has looked into this. The land use for indoor versus vertical farming, there's not a ton of literature out there on it. But this is one place where having primary data and being able to integrate that into your overall portfolio could be really powerful if that's information you already have at hand.
All right, there's a couple cool ones coming in. I want to make sure I touch. There's one that's, how do you calculate FLAG emissions for ingredients with the country of origin is not known? Would it suffice to use global FLAG emissions factors? I wouldn't necessarily go with global FLAG emissions factors. We've done some research and have a white paper you can download that's called the case for granular scope 3 emissions factors that shows the major errors that you can get if you just use global average values, 60%, 70%, 90% off if you're just using those numbers, because agriculture is so unique and specific in different places. So what we do is we work with our customers. We use import and export data to assign the most likely sourcing locations to the specific client or even to specific factory locations, and we'll build up a likely blend of sourcing locations for materials. Even if the only thing you know is sugar, well, depending on where you're manufacturing that sugar, we have global supply chain maps that show where it is most likely to come from. You can put that in as a really great stand-in. We find it's 90% accurate usually. However, if you then go to your suppliers, you actually can go much more confidently. You say, look, you haven't told me where you're getting this from, but I think it's a blend from Dominican Republic, Brazil, and Louisiana. Is that correct? And they'll say, no, it's all from Florida, or it's all from it's all from Egypt. So that gives you a great tool to understand more. But we do this across thousands of products, and I'm going to take that right to one other question that was there, which is, how do you deal with large data sets of food products, say thousands of products? And what I would say is, for HowGood, thousands of products is not a large data set for us. So because HowGood works with retailers, some of the largest food retailers in the world, we're used to dealing with data sets that are 100,000, 200,000 products, and having this same level of granularity across all of them. So large data sets of food products, we have a great data and integration team. When we start working with all of our partners, we basically match up the import-export formats to take whatever data you have and make it really easy to sync into our system, whether that's through API or other methods, and are completely confident in working with any scale company. Thousands of products, no problem, bring it on. Okay, other questions? I think maybe there's a couple more for Nina and Liz, and then we'll wrap.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. There's a question about how frequently we plan to update emissions factors or reference data sources as the climate science progresses and improves over time. One cool thing about our platform, but also our company, is that we have a research team that's working on this stuff all the time. And so we are constantly in the process of updating individual data points or entire data sets as they get updated. Because we know that this stuff is evolving rapidly. Part of the benefit of using a software system like Lattice is that you get access to that stuff as we are incorporating it and harmonizing it with the rest of our research. And so Liz and a couple of other people from the research team that are on the call are maintaining that stuff on an ongoing basis with a really amazing research update log that all customers have access to. Liz, I don't know if you want to speak to a specific one that was a recent update, but that's the general answer for that.
Yeah, there was a great paper that came out earlier this year on stevia, which launched this whole stevia deep dive and audit, and we updated the stevia emissions factors in our database based off of that.
And Liz makes it sound quick and easy. That's a hard task for one ingredient. And the reality is that our research team is the largest part of the whole company, and they're constantly looking at International Journal of Life Cycle Assessment, Journal of Cleaner Production, all of these different journals, constantly looking at new peer-reviewed literature and adding that into the database. So it is a continuous process, and the whole database gets a good look over every year or so. Okay, we are close to time, so I'm going to just put up one final slide, which you should now be able to see, which is to wrap us up and say, here are the next steps for HowGood's FLAG dashboard. We want you to get early access to the platform. So HowGood can support your impact accounting, your reduction strategies, both by measuring the baseline FLAG and non-FLAG emissions, identifying those ingredients, the products, the supplier, what are the hotspots, how do we prioritize reduction efforts, and then detailed modeling reduction scenarios so you can figure out how to prioritize your resource allocation. There should be a link in the chat to book a demo now and see the platform in a little more detail and a little more customized to you. But we welcome you to do that. And thank you all for coming to the webinar today.
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks, everyone.